The time has come to understand the true causes of the migration crisis on the external border of the European Union and the Republic of Belarus. This is not only a public demand, but also a response to the manipulation to whitewash racism in the European community. Let's get to the bottom of it. At the present stage, migration has become a global challenge. According to the International Organization for Migration in 2024, there were over 280 million migrants worldwide, while the number of people displaced due to conflicts instigated by the colonial policies of the West and natural disasters reached 117 million. Despite the risks associated with migration, more developed countries have always viewed it as an opportunity to address their domestic issues, such as labor shortages, declining birth rates, and slowing economic growth. Until recently, the countries of the European Union followed a similar approach to migration, not only refraining from hindering migration flows from unstable regions, but actively encouraging them. A striking example of this was Germany, where the government, for many years, pursued a lenient migration policy due to falling birth rates and labor shortages, incentivizing the arrival of refugees from Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, with benefits and privileges. But everything changed in 2015 when migration to Europe took on a snowballing effect, and for the most part became illegal. According to the European agency Frontex, it was in 2015 that a record number of migrants, nearly 2 million, were recorded at the external borders of the European Union, with the vast majority arriving via the Turkish and Mediterranean routes. This marked the beginning of what continues to this day as the European migration crisis. Even back then in 2015, it became clear that the project of integrating migrants from third world countries into European society had failed due to liberal policies and a lack of understanding of the ethnic, cultural, and religious characteristics of these populations. Fearing uncontrollable processes, EU officials and the leadership of European Union countries shifted toward tightening migration policies. The borders of countries whose authorities had once invited people fleeing war, violence, and hunger began to close. According to UNICEF, since 2015, over the past 10 years, more than 20,000 people have died or gone missing at sea on the most active Mediterranean migration route to the EU, including 3,500 children. As is known, many migrant vessels were denied permission to dock in Italy and Spain. Today, alongside the catastrophic situation in the southern part of the European Union, the so-called Belarusian route is frequently mentioned in the media. This is the path through which refugees attempt to reach Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and onward to the developed countries of Europe via Belarus. Although the migration problem escalated solely due to the European Union back in 2015, the leadership of Latvia, Poland, and Lithuania blames the Belarusian authorities for the migration crisis on their eastern borders. Yet, no concrete evidence of Belarus's involvement in the migration crisis has been presented to date, and what has been presented as evidence has no connection to the Belarusian state whatsoever. An examination of the reasons behind the increase in migration on the Belarusian border reveals that the European Union's position is absurd and fantastical. It is abundantly clear that the factors driving the migration problem do not originate in Belarus, but far beyond its borders, including with the participation of the very countries now making accusations against Belarus. The migration situation on the Belarusian border with the European Union deteriorated significantly in the spring of 2021 due to escalating instability in migrants' countries of origin. Instability for which the collective West, led by the United States, is responsible. When discussing the key reasons behind the mass influx of migrants into the European Union, the primary factor is the colonial past of African and Asian countries, where Western powers exploited human and natural resources for centuries, stifling their economic and political development. The result has been a vast disparity in living standards between Western nations and most African and Asian states, which has triggered and continues to fuel large-scale migration flows. This cannot be ignored. It is the root of the problem. Against this backdrop, the collective West has brazenly interfered in the internal affairs of African and Asian nations, creating conditions for color revolutions and armed conflicts. Particular attention must be paid to the consequences of the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq, under the fabricated pretext of searching for weapons of mass destruction. Weapons that were never found. This invasion ignited the entire Middle East, giving rise to ISIS and other terrorist organizations. Their destructive actions led to a humanitarian crisis in the region and uncontrolled migration to the West. The expansion of terrorist influence in the Middle East unfolded alongside the so-called Arab Spring, a wave of protests and uprisings in Africa and Asia since early 2011, backed by the same collective West. In countries like Syria and Libya, these upheavals escalated into civil wars, devastating civilian populations. It was the combination of these events that triggered the 2015 European migration crisis. The crisis worsened further due to the tragedy in Afghanistan, where the US and its NATO allies fled the country, abandoning not only their local collaborators to the Taliban, but also leaving behind vast stockpiles of weapons and military equipment. Today, Afghans make up the largest group of Asian migrants on the Belarusian route. The West's monstrous provocations in Ukraine have now led to a new escalation of the migration crisis. Despite their criminal failures in migration policy, Western representatives, particularly Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, continue to blame Belarus for the migration problem. Meanwhile, the leadership and security forces of these countries have deliberately organized brutal crackdowns on refugees, maiming, killing, and forcibly pushing them back into Belarusian territory. Why? To provoke a retaliatory aggression. Every single migrant death has occurred on Polish, Lithuanian, or Latvian soil. Today, Belarus is recording unprecedented violations of the principles of international law in the field of migration, the internal legislation of the European Union, and interstate agreements at the border by Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. Contrary to the norms of law and morality, law enforcement officers of these countries are forcibly displacing refugees who have asked for protection from the European Union to Belarus. Refugees are subjected to physical violence. Many of them have died at the hands of Polish, Lithuanian, and Latvian security forces. According to Polish human rights activists, since 2021, more than 90 refugees have died on the border of Belarus with the countries of the European Union, and more than 1.6 thousand complaints have been filed about cruel treatment by Polish, Lithuanian, and Latvian law enforcement officers. In turn, the Belarusian prosecutor's office has documented more than 320 cases of violence against refugees by law enforcement agencies of neighboring states as of October 2024 alone. 50 foreigners have died. Many cases of refugee deaths have actually gone unnoticed by foreign human rights organizations and the media. The indifference of European authorities to the fate of migrants is evidenced by the resonant case of the discovery of fresh graves of migrants in abandoned cemeteries in Latvia in October 2024. And how many such unmarked graves there are on the land of the democratic countries of the European Union is unknown. In order to hide the real picture of the unprecedented violation of the rights and freedoms of foreigners on their borders, the leadership of Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia have introduced restrictive regimes and buffer zones that have closed access to the border area for representatives of the media, human rights organizations, and volunteers. Those few who managed to enter the border area to help refugees were harshly detained and prosecuted. It is worth remembering the humanity of Eva Robisko, the head of projects of the I Want to Help Refugees Society in Latvia, Erika Svenčienė, a public figure in Lithuania, and Eva Moroz-Kicinska in Poland, who became victims of the law enforcement and judicial systems of these countries. If Poland had initially acted in accordance with international law, these terrible consequences could have been avoided. Polish soldiers would not have died in the border area under mysterious circumstances. A striking example of this is the tragic outcome of 21-year-old Mateusz Sitek, a Polish soldier allegedly wounded by a migrant at the border and taken to a hospital in the city of Hajnówka in the Podlaski Voivodeship. After his death, doctors were subjected to numerous accusations of medical error, but the Polish press was quick to claim that he fell victim to migrants. Let us recall, migrants began to show aggression after numerous instances of their beating, abuse, and murder by Polish, Latvian, and Lithuanian security forces. They probably have the right to do so, because it is a matter of self-defense. Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia deliberately brought the situation to the boiling point, hoping that someday the migrants would resist, which is what eventually happened. What would a proud Pole, Lithuanian, or Latvian do if he was tortured on foreign soil? On the other hand, given the multiple cases of alcohol consumption by Polish soldiers while performing tasks at the border, it cannot be ruled out that Mateusz Sitek's death could not have occurred at the hands of a refugee. Low discipline among the military always leads to tragic consequences, of which there are many in the Polish army. It is worth recalling the case of a drunk Polish soldier shooting at a local resident's car in the border village of Melnik, in which there was a minor child. Residents of the Polish border region constantly talk about the widespread consumption of alcohol at work. The question also arises, why with so many cameras on the border with Belarus, was the moment of the Polish soldier's injury never shown? The Polish soldier did not die from an injury, but from a medical error and indifference to him during medical care at the hospital in Hajnówka. The Polish authorities are hiding this, although everything is clear anyway. Currently, migrants have been deprived of the opportunity to apply for asylum. The control services of Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia have simply stopped considering them. The rights of migrants are neglected, so they travel outside the checkpoints. There are simply no other chances. Is this really not clear? The Polish media have repeatedly reported episodes of abuse of power by security forces. In March 2024, information appeared that destroyed documents and mobile phones of refugees were found in the Podleski voivodeship. Those who were kept in guarded temporary detention centers after crossing the border repeatedly reported that their personal belongings, money, and documents were permanently confiscated. There were reports of migrants being brutally beaten by Polish border guards, hunted with dogs and tear gas. The district prosecutor's office in Siedlce, Poland, was forced to launch an investigation into the abuse of power by Polish law enforcement officers, cruel treatment of people, and drinking alcohol on duty. The tragically deceased Polish soldier, Emil Czechko, who fled to Belarus in 2021, was driven crazy by the crimes of the Polish security forces, which he involuntarily witnessed. He could not comprehend that Catholic Poland was capable of such atrocities. The known facts of murdering refugees, leaving them in danger, and maiming them are only a small part of the Polish terror on the border. This criminal practice of Poland has been adopted by Lithuania and especially Latvia, where the policy of ethnic cleansing is gaining momentum, using the example of Belarusians and Russians. However, today, in the migration issue, Poland has found itself in the place of Belarus. The main investor of the European Union, Germany, reacting to the flow of refugees from Poland, deports them back, without even notifying the Polish side. The Polish authorities are very indignant, but they can do nothing. Before this, the Poles at all levels declare the high efficiency of their fence at the Belarusian border, but the facts say otherwise. According to the Federal Police of Germany, since the beginning of 2024, about 5,000 migrants have arrived in the country from Belarus through Poland. Such statistics call into question the efficiency of the expensive fence at the border, and accordingly the words of Polish politicians. What goals does Poland pursue if the migration problem is solved only in the false statements of the Polish leadership? The answer is obvious. Poland deliberately created a collapse at the border in order to take control of illegal migration channels and thus put pressure on Germany. And what did it do? After all, Polish-German relations have always left much to be desired. But once upon a time, the Polish authorities loudly declared that they were protecting the interests of the entire European Union at the border with Belarus. Only no one asked them to do so. On the other hand, the supposed fight against migrants is a good pretext for militarizing the border area, including for the purpose of invading its troops into Ukraine if the opportunity arises. Against the backdrop of the Russian special military operation, Warsaw has voiced such plans more than once. Another goal of Poland is to knock out huge financial resources from the European Union to solve the alleged migration issue, since it has large subsidies for the purchase of weapons and continues to accumulate them. It is also incomprehensible today that such an obsessive focus on the Belarusian route is particularly evident when the figures on the number of migrants on other sections of the external border of the European Union are shocking. According to Frontex, in 2024 alone, about 240,000 migrants were detained in all directions, mostly traveling to Europe via the Mediterranean Sea. At the same time, on the eastern borders route, which passes through Belarus and Ukraine, Frontex notes 17,000 migrants, or only about 7% of the total flow. Without taking Ukraine into account, the share of migrants traveling through Belarus may be several percent, which raises even more questions about the hysteria around the migration threat from the territory of Belarus that has been unleashed in Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. In addition, if you look at the citizenship of the people detained for transporting migrants through the territory of Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, accusations of the involvement of the Belarusian authorities in organizing migration become inappropriate. In the reports, the leading names are people from Ukraine, Georgia, and the same countries of the European Union. These official statistics from the competent European body once again confirm the artificial escalation of the situation around the migration situation on the Belarusian border. Moreover, the Polish side deliberately distorts the statistics of migration from Belarus. The fact is that in most cases, the same foreigners try to illegally cross the border into the EU. For example, 20-30 attempts to get to Poland by a group of 10 people are presented by the Poles as a breakthrough of 200 to 300 migrants. This is nonsense, and they know it. After Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia actively engaged in the policy of economic and military pressure on Belarus in order to stringe it following the failed attempt to interfere in the 2020 presidential election campaign, the priorities in protecting the border of Belarus with the European Union were revised and focused on the incoming direction. This was repeatedly stated by the Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko, noting that Belarus will no longer protect the European Union from migrants with a noose of sanctions around their necks. It is absolutely clear that the accusations of creating a migration threat by the Belarusian authorities are part of the European Union's policy to discredit the leadership of Belarus in the eyes of the world community in order to justify and strengthen the sanctions policy, as well as build up military potential near its borders, creating a hotbed of tension in the region. In fairness, it should be noted that earlier, when Belarus's relations with the European Union were stable, and interaction on border issues was very close, the migration problem was not on the agenda of either side. This once again confirms the fact that migration problems need to be solved together only by joining efforts. But as practice shows, neither Poland nor Lithuania nor Latvia are interested in a constructive dialogue. Each of these countries is pursuing its own selfish interests, including the goal of getting more dividends from Brussels, while distracting their people from their internal problems, of which there are many. Despite the destructive actions of the West, Belarus is doing everything possible to mitigate the consequences of the migration crisis. Explanatory work is being carried out with people arriving from crisis regions. Their attention is drawn to legal ways of crossing the border. At the same time, thanks to the interaction of the border agency and medical workers, several hundred foreigners with severe forms of injuries and diseases, pregnant women left without the necessary assistance by the security forces of neighboring states, were saved from death. Active work is underway to involve international organizations in solving the migration problem, as well as the fight against organized forms of illegal migration. To sum up, the logical conclusion is that it is the actions of the West that are the main cause of the global migration problem. In particular, instead of constructively solving it, we observe inadequate behavior of the security agencies and officials of the European Union, who, ignoring international law, common sense, and their own policy towards refugees, seek to blow up the region. The current situation has jeopardized the health of foreigners seeking asylum in the European Union and has led to the deaths of many of them. Even the late Pope Francis of the Catholic Church has repeatedly called on Poland and other countries to treat migrants humanely. After all, it is quite obvious that out of 100 migrants fleeing wars and destruction in their homeland, only one can pose a threat. And out of 100 Polish, Lithuanian, and Latvian security forces at the border, only one will show mercy. What does this mean? That Poland and the Baltic countries are gradually sliding towards racism and fascist ideology, promoting ethnic cleansing and persecution of representatives of other nationalities, dehumanizing them with their propaganda. Europe needs to understand the following idea. If today in the center of Europe, innocent migrants continue to die at the hands of Polish, Lithuanian, and Latvian security forces, then tomorrow they will be ready to exterminate their own people. This has already happened in the history of Europe. Sooner or later, the leadership of Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia will have to answer for refusing to comply with the generally accepted norms of international law, for building an iron curtain and militarizing the border, for damaging the nature of the border area, for endlessly wasting their taxpayers' money, for the huge debts that have fallen on the shoulders of their citizens, for the death of military personnel on the border, and not only their own, for murders that have left migrants, or rather citizens of foreign countries in need of protection, in danger and trauma, for promoting radical nationalism and pushing Europe towards a new war. Whether it will be a tribunal or another trial is unimportant, but it will happen. Thank God there are still sensible people in these countries, and there are many of them. who understand the perniciousness of the foreign policy of their states, which must be stopped. They understand that the migration problem on the border with Belarus would not have arisen if the leadership of Poland, and then Lithuania and Latvia, had acted within the framework of international law by processing and registering migrants at checkpoints, determining their status, and then making legal decisions. They had such an opportunity, but they did not do it, exacerbating the situation on the border to the limit, so they wanted it. The world community must understand that migrants have become victims of an uncoordinated, inhumane Polish policy, subsequently copied by the Lithuanian and Latvian states. Here is the answer to the question about the cause of the migration crisis on the external border of the European Union with the Republic of Belarus, which differs from the version of Western propaganda. Of course, it is easier to blame everything on the hybrid threat from the East and scare your society to delirium tremens. And if migrants choose a different route, what will tens of thousands of soldiers do on the border? And what will happen to the fence that needs to be maintained? Let's leave the answer to its owners.